The North Carolina Healthcare Association is a proud sponsor of the Do Politics Better podcast. The association is a united voice for hospitals, health systems, and care providers to ensure they can offer high-quality, lower-cost care to all North Carolinians. Visit nchealthcare.org to learn more about how hospitals and health systems are working to make healthcare easier, more convenient, and with better outcomes.
Sky, welcome back from your trip.
It's been an exciting day back.
Yeah. Our intention was to have the podcast out today. We have an interview that you and I did with Senator Bob Brinson. He's our newest state senator in the General Assembly, and you're going to hear that later in the podcast. And then Senator Benton Sawrey came in yesterday, Wednesday the 19th. We recorded the news and kind of had some fun with NC State on the back end of the podcast. And we're ready to drop that podcast at noon today, but today has been about a very serious story in NC poll world as it pertains to the gubernatorial election.
All day we have been hearing rumors that a CNN story is forthcoming that is going to drop plenty of information about Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. We'd heard that he was going to drop out of the race, but as of 10 minutes ago, it's about 3 p.m., as of 10 minutes ago, he put up a statement saying he is not dropping out of the race. Those are not his words. And this is just a half-truth they're telling about him.
Yeah. Those words being words of racism, it sounds like, words about sex and pornography. There's all sorts of rumors out there. And I guess, we have CNN on. We're waiting for this news package to drop. We know that Carolina Journal and Business NC, they have published some preview stories out there. And of course, Lieutenant Governor Robinson's statement confirms that CNN has the story. But we wanted you to know that as we were talking about the John Locke polling, and you're going to hear Senator Sawrey and I talk about that as we talk about the various races, we had no idea that this news was dropping today. So we want to let you know, just to put it in context, that, yeah, we are talking about polling, but it'll be interesting to see what polling looks like after this story drops. So, Sky, next week we'll spend a little bit more time rehashing what we're hearing or what we're going to hear on CNN. But listeners, thank you, and we hope you enjoy the podcast. It's the Do Politics Better podcast. I'm Brian Lewis.
And I'm Sky David.
All right, Sky's out of town, and I have a guest co-host this week who looks nothing like Sky David. Senator Benton Sawrey from Johnston County, thank you for joining me and co-hosting this week.
It's great to be here. I guess Danny Britt was unavailable.
That's true. And maybe State Lines is not filming today?
Maybe, perhaps, yep.
Now, every time I turn on my TV, it seems you are on State Lines with Senator Bodie and, of course, Kelly McCullen and the whole crew over there. This is a new venture over at PBS, but you seem to be a regular.
Sure. No, it's a great show. They do a great job. I love the format. Kind of a debate amongst people with some different backgrounds. But yes, Senator Bodie and I have a tendency to be on there together. In fact, I was asked if there's a contract between the two of us that we have to appear together at the same time. I think I've been on there with Senator Lowe and Representative Bwancy from Orange County and a couple others. But it's a great opportunity, and I'm always surprised about how many people turn in. I hear about it, at church in town. I heard about a fundraising event a couple weeks ago. So just a great opportunity. I think Kelly and Dre are doing a great job with it. Yeah,
I talked to Kelly the other day. He was in the building. Senator Bodie was there, and I said, where's Senator Sawrey? You seem to package them together. He says it's intentional. He likes the dynamic between you two, which I have to say, Senator Sawrey, I take a little pride in the fact that you two, I guess, kind of met because you would have met eventually, right? But
Sure.
you guys had just been elected, and so there was some reference to each other, and then you guys reached out.
True, and you're right. I think we talked shortly after both of us were on your podcast back in, this is probably November of 2022, so coming up on 2 years. It seems like a lifetime ago at this point. But Senator Bodie and I have some lived generational experiences. We're about the same age. We represent kind of a suburban rural district and things like that. So it's an interesting dynamic when you have a Republican millennial and a Democrat millennial. Adds for some character and color for the debate.
Yeah, I bet. Well, we're going to talk about her seat a little later in this podcast because, she's leaving and there is a hot race up there. Before we get to that, our friends over at the John Locke Foundation sent us a poll, said we could see the poll prior to Thursday. If you're listening to this podcast on Thursday, this poll just dropped, but thank you to our friends over at the John Locke Foundation for sharing it. Senator, the big news is that President Trump seems to have an edge over Vice President Harris. So he's at 45.6%. Harris is at 45.3%, certainly within the margin of error. We are going to see, I believe, this go right down to November 5th.
Yeah, and I think that's where North Carolina is going to be. It's certainly where it has been for the past decade and a half, maybe 2 decades or so. I mean, North Carolina, has been a close state, but tends to vote Republican with the exception of the 2008 election. So I don't see that result as much of a surprise. And, based on the top issues that we see of inflation, immigration, and jobs, I think if you look down at the crosstabs, you'll see that Trump has the clear edge on that, especially with the undecideds.
Here's the big question. I know a lot of folks are talking about it, a lot of theories. I want to get your take on this. Josh Stein, our Attorney General, is at 45.5%. And then Mark Robinson, our Lieutenant Governor, is at 39.2%. So Stein and Harris, that's pretty close, but Robinson doesn't seem to have what Trump, he's about 6 points down from where Trump is. Are people really going to the polls and voting for Trump and then crossing over and voting for Josh Stein? Are you hearing this?
Those voters are out there.
Have you met one?
I have met those voters. It's an interesting conversation. It's an interesting dynamic. North Carolina has that history of the ticket split at the top. I think it was Rob Christensen that wrote the book, The Paradox of Tar Heel Politics, that talked about some of the divergent philosophies that we have. We saw that in the last gubernatorial and presidential race with Forrest and Cooper, where there was there were significant numbers of Cooper Trump voters out there, which is again just a similarly odd dynamic. What's noteworthy to me is that Stein and Harris are receiving essentially, they're both at 45.5. So we're not seeing Trump voters necessarily moving to Stein at this point. It just appears to me there's about 6% of the electorate that's voting for Trump right now that's not necessarily ready to say they're voting for Robinson.
All right. The Attorney General's race, many of us at the beginning of the election season had this as the main event, right? This is the race to watch. This is it's not your Super Bowl, but it's like your NFC championship game, right? Between Dan Bishop and Jeff Jackson. But it's kind of been a sleeper up until this point. I just saw first ads from Jeff Jackson. He's basically in a courtroom making his argument. His opening statement, I think, is even what he calls the ad. We're hearing that Dan Bishop is launching his ad maybe next week, but the poll shows that Jeff Jackson has a edge over Bishop, 44.6% for Jackson, 43.1% for Dan Bishop. What's your take on this?
Within the margin of error, statistically tied, not a lot of media out there, right? I am surprised, like you are, that it's taken this long after Labor Day to see a lot of airtime spent on this case. But I think you're going to see a lot made because we have two very different candidates here, and it's clear what Jeff Jackson stands for. It's clear what Dan Bishop stands for. This is a big opportunity for Republicans. This would be the first time we've elected a Republican Attorney General since Reconstruction, and it's very important to Republicans across the state that we take a hold of this council state position.
Are you seeing either one of these gentlemen out on the campaign trail? I know you're doing some traveling, going to fundraisers for Republicans, so you're probably not likely to see Jeff Jackson, but are you seeing anything out there as far as county meetings or whatever?
I do. I've seen Congressman Bishop he came and spoke at an event in Johnson County recently. He has been out there working hard. He's beating the pavement. He's on the campaign trail. The only thing I've really seen from Jeff Jackson are TikTok videos. I don't know how effective that is. I don't have TikTok.
The labor commissioner race has captured the imagination of NC poll world, and I hope it does for the broader electorate out there. But we have two candidates that are very different. Style and substance, very different. Both have really interesting backstories, but they seem to be locked into a very tight race. Luke Farley, who has been on the podcast, is at 40.9%. Braxton Winston, who's also been on the podcast, is at 41.3%. So we're talking a 0.4% difference according to this John Locke poll. Senator, I know that, I know you've listened to both interviews on the podcast, and you've sent us some messages about that, and thank you for the feedback. And then I also know that you have known Luke Farley prior to when you entered politics.
Sure, I've known Luke since college. Luke was at UNC Chapel Hill when I was at NC State. We were both active in the college Republicans on the statewide level at the time. Luke's a great guy. I think the world of Luke as a person. He's got a great family. He's very, very knowledgeable. His credentials are incredible, and he's getting endorsements from industry groups, I believe from labor groups as well. He's picking up support in places that surprise me every day. So I am encouraged. I was looking at the crosstabs, in this poll. In this race, I would want to be where Luke is. Luke is continuing to grow his margin. He's moving people at a greater rate from the probably voting for Luke to the definitely voting for Luke. Momentum is on his side. And if we saw anything in the primary election so far in the general, Luke's going to work for this. He's out there every single day working to become North Carolina's next labor commissioner.
Well, these two are going to face off, I believe, October 1st. It's going to be an interesting debate. Let's turn to the General Assembly. We are getting data from this John Locke polling showing that the Republican candidate in a generic ballot. Now, listeners, a generic ballot is where the pollster is just asking you, do you plan to vote Republican or Democratic? The generic ballot shows that the Republican candidate has a 46% of the vote, and then the Democratic candidate has 45.6%. So there's an edge there to the Republican. Not huge, but it's there. Definitely the Republican candidate, 39.7. Definitely the Democratic candidate, 38.9. So again, not much difference. Want to ask you about this generic ballot, but also could you dig deeper for us in 4 races? Senator Michael Lee down in New Hanover County, Senator Lisa Barnes, Nash County. And then there is the Ashley Adams-Terrence Everett race up in the northern Wake County area. And then in the southern Wake County area, you got Scott Lassiter versus Senator Lisa Grafstein. Can you handicap those 4 races for us?
There's a snapshot in time in the John Locke poll that shows that Republicans on the generic ballot with state legislative races have consistently held the edge. I think voters, respond well to, the policies that we've enacted and the reforms that we've acted over the past, 14 years since we took over the majority. I'm in the Senate, privy to a lot of the conversations that we have there. I feel really good about us retaining our supermajority. Michael Lee is a great candidate down in New Hanover County. Lisa Barnes is a great candidate in Nash County. And I think that's something that differentiates us, from the Democrat opposition at this point, is that, we have great folks, running for Senate. They're in their communities. They know their communities. Their communities are seeing what they're doing. One thing we see constantly is that we are overperforming places. I'll just give you an example, not to mention his name a second time, but, Danny Britt down in Robinson County. That is a seat that I believe when he won it in 2016, it was the first time that a Republican had won something in that particular region, in decades, if not since Reconstruction. And he constantly overperforms the top of the ticket with Trump and Robinson in this case. Michael Lee is overperforming Trump. Lisa Barnes is overperforming. Our candidates are working hard, and they're doing things that the constituents want to see. In this generic ballot, I think puts us in a good position in Wake County too. We've got great environment generally at the national level where you see Republicans, having the issues in their favor that are most important to the voters of inflation and immigration and jobs. If I were picking one of the two sides, I would rather be the Republicans on the Grafstein-Laster race or the Republicans on the Everett versus Adams race going forward.
So I'm seeing a lot of ads coming out of the Ashley Adams, Terrence Everett camps. Terrence Everett just launched an ad, I believe, in the last few days. Ashley Adams has been up for 2 or 3 weeks, and in fact, I think she's on her 3rd ad. Not so much in the Scott Lasseter-Lisa Grafstein race from either side. I do feel like I'm seeing more campaigning from Scott Lasseter. I'm seeing him show up at events. He just recently got endorsed by the police officers here in Raleigh. What's your take on that Southern Wake? It seems to be the sleeper of the 4.
Well, the Northern Wake Granville seat sets up better just with the Granville anchor there, and some more rural territory, with a stronger Republican base. So, I think we're just in a better position up in that particular neck of the woods. Media is also expensive. Getting on this market. A lot of mail being spent in the Laster and Grafstein race. I think we've observed a significant uptick in Democrat spending in the Southern Wake seat. But Scott's out there working hard. He's campaigning. That's a unique district. But again, it's going to be a fight to Election Day.
There's been some controversy this week, Senator, around AI-generated campaign ads. There is an independent expenditure out there, unaffiliated with the Josh Stein campaign. Democratic donor Todd Steifel has taken quotes he says that Lieutenant Governor Robinson has made, and he has made them sound like Mark Robinson has vocalized them. So he's taken this audio and he's put it on an AI-generated graphic. And he's done it in 2 ways. There's online ads, so you get on your computer and you see the ads. But there's also a van that's been circling around Raleigh with this message. Are we in a new frontier here of campaigning that is scary? Is this ethical? Is this right? Should we be doing this?
It's concerning. And look, we are behind the 8 ball, I think, on a lot of new technologies with respect to some of our rules and regulations on campaigns. I mean, I think there's certainly some gaps, and social media has evolved and text messaging has evolved, and now we're talking about artificial intelligence and superimposing and deep fakes, and it's somewhat scary what you can do with videos and voice capturing and certain authorities. It's a little disconcerting to see this because I think it's going to be very easy to show the voter what somebody truly says in a way that you can differentiate an actual video from artificial intelligence and putting that out there. I think it's also going to make voters more cynical as they see this, especially as it's done in a negative campaign context. They're going to see this and they're going to become desensitized to certain messages and images and video clips, and I wonder how they'll respond going forward and looking for information about candidates. This becomes a very widespread trend.
It feels like a new frontier. In fairness to the Stein campaign, he has disavowed this. Donor has said this is not the way to go. Of course, the Robinson campaign has also complained about it. But I don't know what we can do legislatively, or can we do anything legislatively, but these are things I'm sure a future General Assembly will have to look at. Probably not the time to do it now.
No, not the time to do it now, but I agree it's something to take a look at. Just from a voter and an election integrity angle, I think it's going to be very important that we sit down and really contemplate how AI and deep fakes and use of voice and images is going to impact elections and getting our messages out in the future.
So in continuing with the sad news that we talked about last week, we have news that Mecklenburg County Democrats have nominated Bobby Drakeford. He is a developer in Mecklenburg County. He's going to finish the term of the late Representative Kelly Alexander, who passed away last week. Now, what's interesting about this is Aisha Dew, who is running unopposed for the Alexander seat, she doesn't currently live in the district. So she's endorsed Drakeford. So I guess he will serve under the current district, but when the district changes, she will be the next representative. Of course, Governor Cooper will make this official. He has 7 days to do that. All indications are he's going to do it. Senator, did you at all work with Representative Alexander, have any contact with him?
I never had a chance to work with Representative Alexander, but by all accounts, he was a gentleman and had a lot of respect by his colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the House, and very sorry to hear about that from his family. I thought the picture on social media, the flag draped over his desk, was very fitting.
Congratulations to future Representative Bobby Drakeford, and we wish you well in taking Representative Alexander's seat. Senator, we got some news this week that a fixture in the General Assembly, the Christian Action League, and many of our listeners may know Reverend Mark Creech. He's the executive director of the Christian Action League. They announced this week that they are going to cease operations by the end of September. They will be done. They're taking donations, by the way, to help them with some expenses as they close out. But this is something that really hasn't taken hold in the mainstream media as news. But Senator, this is an organization that's been around for decades, advocating for biblical stands on political issues. You can imagine abortion, alcohol, gambling, the whole gamut of things. And we don't have to get into those issues, but it is a definitely news to NC Poll World.
I did not realize that the Christian Action League had been around for, I think you said 75 years or before we were on the podcast. I know Reverend Creech. He was a fixture in the General Assembly. Met with them on several occasions about different issues. I wonder, why they're folding. I thought the organization had a big voice on Jones Street. I thought Reverend Creech was really up there, working hard on behalf of their particular set of issues.
Well, we certainly do wish Reverend Creech well. He is someone that I've always enjoyed talking to in the building, and I'll be honest with you, Senator, half the time it's not even about politics.
Again, I echo what you said. Super nice guy, very knowledgeable. Worked very hard, and has certainly been a fixture in Raleigh for as long as I can remember.
So this week, Sky and I sat down with our newest member of the North Carolina Senate, Senator Bob Brinson. He represents Beaufort County, Craven County, and Lenoir counties.
The Do Politics Better podcast is supported by the North Carolina Travel Industry Association.
Founded in 1955, NCTIA has a distinguished history of partnering with the North Carolina General Assembly to strengthen and preserve tourism in North Carolina.
Visit nctia.travel for more information on how you can support your local tourism destination and the thousands of North Carolina jobs it creates. Senator Bob Brinson, welcome to the podcast and to the General Assembly.
Yeah, exactly.
Start us off by telling us about your district. Where is your district? What makes your district special to you?
Well, the district is Craven County, Beaufort County, and Lenoir County. So Eastern Carolina, on the Sound, on the inner banks, kind of what they call them. And that really is what makes the district beautiful. You know, when I tell people, hey, I'm from Craven, hey, I know New Bern. When I say Beaufort County, oh, I know Washington. It's like, oh, Lenoir County, oh, I know Kinston. You know, so you have these dynamic downtowns that are historic, picturesque, on the water, because even Lenoir has, you know, rivers running through it. So, you know, it's a very agrarian also, you know, farming. So pretty much a rural district. And just that, having lived in DC, you know, it's a slower pace of life, and where people actually take the time to get to know you and enjoy life and enjoy family. And that, to me, it encompasses what the district is.
New Bern was our seat of government for years.
Oh, it was,
And,
yes.
Do you think about that as you commute into Raleigh? Take that trip up 70? Do you think, boy, if they could just come to us in New Bern?
Well, here's it. I'd rather not New Bern look like Raleigh. How's that? You know, please, you can keep the traffic up here and all that goes with it. But I do think about that because, you know, I was on the New Bern City Council. And so, yeah, my drive down to City Hall, I drove by Tryon Palace every time. You know, being a New Bern native, I did take North Carolina history.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a surprise with all the transplants coming in to the state of North Carolina. They don't realize that New Bern was the colonial capital.
Your family goes deep into Craven County, right? As far as generational...
10
establishment.
generations.
Wow.
My great uncle did a genealogy book called Case and Sons. And this is the other question I get quite a bit is, hey, are you kin to this Brinson or kin to that Brinson? And because it is a very localized name. There's a lot of Brinsons down there. And the truth is we're all related. It's a matter of how far back you go, because my great uncle found there was only one Brinson family that emigrated in like the 1680s from England and landed about the Virginia Beach area. And it was a grandson that moved down to New Bern and been there ever since. And each one of my family has lived in New Bern now for 10 generations.
And your wife, is she from the area as well?
She is not. She's
Okay.
from the upper Midwest, Minnesota, South Dakota.
Okay.
That's where she's from. So we've kind of got an agreement that I take her back to the snow once a year. You know, she tried to, you know, when we were getting out of the military, it was, you know, hey, where are we going to live? And so she was trying hard to pull me to South Dakota. I'm like, I can't handle that cold. No, please no.
For listeners, your name might be new to them,
Yes.
but your predecessor was a friend of the pod on our podcast often and decided not to run again.
Right.
How did it come to be that you ran? You're not new to politics, so we'll get into that as well. But how did it come to be that you ran for this seat?
Great question, because it absolutely was not on my radar in December. We were getting flyers from Jim Perry about his reelection, and so wasn't thinking about it. I was a New Bern alderman, like I said, and was doing that job. And was content and happy doing that job. But then Thursday night, before the last day of filing, I got a phone call from Representative Steve Tyson, who represents Craven County. And so he gives me a call Thursday night, and he's like, hey, we don't think that Jim Perry's running for re-election. You know, he's not acting like an incumbent who should have filed about a week ago. And he's like, I want you to consider running. And of course, I'm in shock, you know, like, what? My wife came home, and of course, I shocked her. I've never done this before. I said, she came home, and I said, hun, we got something we need to talk about. Sit down on the couch, we'll talk.
Every woman's favorite words. We need to talk.
I have never done that before. And so, you know, the eyes kind of got wide, and her response was pretty immediate. It was, you've been waiting, your whole life for this. This is your time. You need to do it. So the next morning, I meet Steve again for lunch, and he's like, yep, Jim's not responding to anybody. I said, okay, well, I'm going to go down to Board of Elections, 10 o'clock. We'll see what happens. I said, because I'm not running against him. It doesn't make any sense. He's doing a great job. I'm not going to do that. And so I go there. I get the paperwork, I say, okay, I'm going to sit here, start filling it out. And literally, Steve calls me again, and he says, hey, he's announced he's not running. And I said, okay, big deep breath, this is it. And literally, the election director walked out and said, next. And I walked in. And that was how I got on the ballot. So about 14 hours to think about it.
Wow.
And I've said it many times. 2024, I feel like I've been shot out of a cannon.
So listeners, a couple housekeeping things. We're recording this conversation on Tuesday, September 10th. So yesterday was the Senate session, September 9th. Also want to go back to the filing that Senator Brinson did. So that Thursday night, some phone calls had come my way. I want to be clear. I had not spoken to Senator Perry Thursday night. I was hearing it from other folks. And I had another candidate, I was being told, it was circulating, local restaurant owner, I think, in Craven County. That person who had run statewide, so had some name ID, decided not to run. I'm sure you had heard some of this as well.
Very briefly, and that's kind of where things were very crazy, because everybody's kind of making their own decisions in silos.
Right.
And so I was hearing bits and pieces, but I was the one standing in line.
There you go.
Yeah.
And no one filed.
And no one else filed.
Except your ultimate challenger.
The ultimate challenger, he had filed about a week before.
Yeah.
And so he was a known challenger. So there was a primary.
So we've talked a lot about the time between December and now. Let's go back a little bit. You are a West Point grad. Tell us about growing up and attending West Point and how you got back to North Carolina.
Yeah. So I am a New Bern native. I was not born in New Bern, but my parents moved there when I was about 2 months old. I grew up, in an area called Bryce's Creek, outside of New Bern, way back in the woods. Okay. And so pretty rural. But one day, my dad came up to me one day and said, hey, have you ever considered going to the military academy? And I'm like, no, what's that? And I think he had a plan, because it actually was the day the Army-Navy game was on. And it's one of those, my parents didn't have any money for college. Okay. And so it was like, okay, if I'm going to go to college, I have to go on my own, or figure out how to go on my own. And so ended up applying, started going to some of the parents' clubs, meeting some of the cadets. I actually went up for a quick overnight thing. They were bringing in prospective cadets, and you got to meet up with a freshman that we call plebes, and you spent the night basically. And so ended up applying and got accepted. Early acceptance program I went through. So by the next December rolled around, and this was actually kind of neat, I got my acceptance letter the next Army-Navy game.
Is that right? That day. And it's paid for by the U.S. government?
It is paid for by the U.S. government, but you owe them 5 years upon graduation. And so...
you must have been an exceptional student. I want to underscore this for listeners unfamiliar with the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, even the Coast Guard and West Point. You have to be a well-rounded student, not only academically, but demonstrate leadership. You even have to have a congressional letter of recommendation. I mean, this is not something where you're just applying to see if you get in. It's tough.
And that's what I was saying. There's a long... application process, and you're correct. They do take a well-rounded student. It's not just good grades. It's not just athleticism. It's all of those.
Yeah, character recommendations, right, all sorts of things.
Yeah, letters of recommendation, that sort of thing. And you mentioned the congressional appointment. Proud to have been appointed by Senator Jesse Helms.
All right.
Each congressman has basically 5 appointments to each academy.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
And so they basically give them a list, give the academy a list, and okay, we pick these folks. And then, they can't have more than 5 people at each academy at a time. So it's kind of one of those revolving things. But there's also vice presidential nominations. There's Medal of Honor winner nominations, so it's not just through Congress, but those are very niche. You have to meet those criteria.
Now, the first senator I saw to congratulate you was, of course, Senator Jim Perry. The second senator I saw to congratulate you, at least on social media, that is Senator Warren Daniel,
Yes.
who is also a West Point graduate.
Yes, and we happen to be West Point classmates.
Wow.
We both graduated out of the same class. We didn't really know each other at West Point. It was a 4-year degree in time management and leadership. So unless somebody was in your class or you were in a club together or you were actually in that company or battalion or regiment, you didn't really see each other. And so I didn't get to know Senator Daniel until the reunions. We started going back to the reunions. And so it was like, oh, you're a North Carolina senator. That's kind of cool. And not knowing that someday we'd actually be working together.
Yeah, colleagues.
Yes.
So back to the question about your wife. She's from South Dakota. You said you didn't want to live there, but you went up north for a while. How did you handle those winters?
Well, DC was okay.
Okay.
That's fine. And here's, I've been some pretty cold places. I was in Korea for 4 years, probably the coldest place I was stationed, because that's a wet cold, and it is windy. And so it gets pretty cold. And then our first duty station was Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Nice.
Did some skiing.
Yeah.
And we've spent time in Germany, about 4.5 years in Germany. And so all over the world. And it was one of those things that what we found being dual military. So I recently retired from the military 28 years in 2019, and she did 26 years. So dual military couple. But the reason why I say that is, we found jobs together. It was easier to be together overseas.
Really?
Yeah, everybody seemed to want to stay stateside, and so it was hard for us to get a job together at our CONUS basis, what they call it, continental United States. And so we spent most of our time overseas.
So there's no consideration of marriage in...
There is.
Okay.
But it's not the primary consideration.
I gotcha.
You
So
know,
it's easier to go overseas.
It's easier to go overseas because, and here's the thing, each branch has an assignment manager that works a portfolio of officers. And we would start working on our next assignment about a year out from when we thought we were moving. And it took about that amount of time for each assignment manager to figure out where the spaces were going to be, get together, where were the commonalities. And it's just, I don't fault them for it. It's just hard, and you're your own best advocate. And so that's how we ended up together most of the time, not always. There were stints of about 6 to 8 months where we might have been stationed apart.
That's hard.
I tell you that, she will tell you that the hardest time we had apart was in Germany. She had just had our oldest son, so our first child. And literally 2 weeks later, I left for Bosnia and was there for a few months and came back. Well, I did such a great job, they offered me a company command, which is a job you need to get promoted, and leadership development and that sort of thing. But it was on the other side of Germany. They told me, hey, my bosses told me, hey, don't take the job unless your wife's command agrees to move her. And so they were very sympathetic to that. unusually so. But, they were sympathetic to that. And so my wife's command agreed, yes, we'll move her. And so I put in the paperwork and I started moving. And then my wife's command came back and said, no, we're not going to move her. Basically an argument back and forth between the commands about what they were going to do about it. But ultimately, my wife didn't move. I moved. They moved her about 20 minutes away from where she currently was, moved her to another place. But she couldn't find childcare. So now we've got, a 6-month-old baby, and I'm on the other side of Germany. Well, I find childcare. So I take my son with me and in company command, and basically what I did was every weekend I would drive the 100 miles back to her to pick up the mother's milk and, that's frozen and all, and let her see her son and then drive back to work each week. And we did that for about 6 months, and before they decided to finally move her, but I mean, that's what you do. Yeah. People say, hey, how do you, the question, how do you survive a dual military career? We ended up having 3 kids, and literally just one day at a time.
Yeah. Moving a lot, being a military family, moving a lot has its own challenges, but it also, my mother would say this when I was younger. I rolled my eyes when I was a kid, but as an adult, I think it's paid off, right? You learn to adapt quickly to other people. You learn to make friends. You learn how to talk in a crowd and try to, make yourself at least friendly to folks. Do you find the case for you?
I grew up in Newburgh. I have one house, two houses, but the same town, never left. But my wife moved around, as she was growing up. And obviously my kids have. Yeah. And so we went to Japan. We moved to Japan. And I was there. And so my kids, I think my oldest had just started high school. And, one day I said, hey, I'm looking around at the status of all the families around us. And, I'm a lieutenant colonel by then, and I had taken battalion command, a higher level command, and seeing all of these 05s and 06s and senior enlisted now going through divorces, having problems with kids. And, I said, hey, how is it that we are surviving? The 5 of us. And my oldest, he said, well, Dad, it's because every time we move, it's just us. It's the core group. And we've always relied on each other. We've always helped each other. And you branch out from there. Yeah. Like you said, making new friends, making new places. And I'll tell you a funny story. When we moved to Texas after Japan, my daughter was taking a world geography or something like that. And so, map of the world. And they were actually talking about Hawaii, giving like a brief discussion about Hawaii history or whatever. And my daughter's like, you're not pronouncing that queen's name right. And I'm trying to think of what the queen was, but can't think of it right now. But she's like, you're not quite pronouncing that name right. And the teacher's like, what do you mean? Because this is Central Texas.
Yeah, right.
And she's like, no, I lived there for 4 years. This is how you pronounce it. This is her name. And it's like, oh, well, where else have you lived? So she comes up and points all over the map. I've lived in all these different places. And then it was like, kids are in awe that she's lived in those places. And so they have a very different perspective.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that too, kind of bring it back to politics a little bit. I have a very different perspective. You get out of this is the way we've always done it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you see how other folks have done it. And it's like, so now it's like, coming into the Senate, I've got ideas that, hey, well, this is kind of how they did it in Texas. This is kind of how they did it in Northern Virginia. Why can't we do some of that here? Mm-hmm. And, having lived through it. And so you bring that varied experiences and varied perspectives And I think it just makes things better.
It also, when I hear political hyperbole, like democracy is a threat or we're becoming a banana republic. I've been to banana republics. Like, don't tell me you're about to become a banana republic.
Yeah.
World travel or travel in general does help your perspective a lot.
It does. I really think, those that, talk about privilege ought to go to a few other countries and see that everybody in America's got some privilege.
Yeah.
I like I said, I've spent time in Somalia. I've spent time in war-torn Bosnia. I've seen, Korea, where you're staring across every day somebody that opposes you. So things like that, it gives you a very different perspective.
Definitely.
Brings me to this question. This might be a personal question, maybe not a podcast question, but how many places have you lived total?
Well, let's count them. After West Point, I went to Fort Rucker, helicopter pilot, so that's our training ground there. Then I went to Colorado, lived in Colorado. From Colorado, deployed to Somalia, went there back to Rucker. Then we went to Germany, so 2 different places in Germany. We lived in Bavaria, which was the eastern side. Then we moved to the western side, right outside of Frankfurt. And then from there, I deployed to Bosnia. Came within 2 days of going to Kosovo, but Milosevic surrendered, so I didn't have to go. Left there. I went back to Rucker for some training, and that was where, again, where my wife and I were separated. She was at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, San Antonio, and I was in Fort Rucker. And again, you make the decision to commit to one another. We met about every other weekend in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And 7-hour drive for both of us. And we actually had the little frequent night card at the hotel that we were staying at. Yeah. And there was another couple that had got stationed the same, and like, well, let's go with you. They did it one time. Wow. But so.
Are they divorced now?
I don't know. I admit I do not know, but you make time for what's a priority.
That is so true.
So, but that's probably why after 32 years, she and I are still together. So Rucker, and so Germany, then we ended up in Hawaii for 3 years. I was there 3 years. My wife and kids were there for 4 because I ended up, this was at the time that Iraq and Afghanistan were going on, and they were looking for people that had not deployed to either place. And this is where it gets back to you're really at the mercy of your assignment officer at that time. I raised my hand and said, hey, I hadn't deployed, in these conflicts. I'll take it. I'll go to Iraq or Afghanistan. I got a job for you. Yeah. I get sent to Kuwait. Wow. So I spent a year in Kuwait. Then I ended up but I took command in Japan. So I was there. What was interesting about Japan was I was in command and my wife was there during the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster, the 9.0 earthquake. So deployed to mainland northern Japan to do disaster recovery, humanitarian assistance for that. Then we left there. We went to Texas, Fort Hood, Central Texas. Then went to Northern Virginia, and then Fort Belvoir, and then I retired out of Fort Belvoir. So I don't know how many that is, but it's all the way around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. You just talk about being a helicopter pilot and not only just being a helicopter pilot, but in hostile territories.
Helicopter pilots are a special breed. Mm-hmm. We kind of have the gallows humor a little bit sometimes, that a helicopter is not meant to fly.
No, that's what I've heard. It's like a hummingbird. It shouldn't be up in the air.
Right. You beat the air into submission is what we call it. And so, if the rotor stops, or even if the rotor just starts coasting, you don't go very far. But you train for that. Okay. And again, it's one of those, you get into it, you're a different breed, you think about things differently, you do what you can to survive. I mean, But like I said, the Army does a lot of training.
Have you ever been in a precarious situation as a pilot? You got out of it somehow.
Well, not really.
Okay.
I have been fortunate. I was never actually in direct enemy contact, but I'm very careful to say that.
Good idea.
Exactly. Because there are some nowadays that don't understand the nuance. They're in trouble, but the general public doesn't understand the nuance. Have I been shot at? Yes. Did I know it at the time? No.
Okay.
I mean, it was one of those things. I was in Somalia. We were transporting some folks, landed in the middle of the city, dropped them off, came back a couple hours later, picked them up, and they said, "Hey, did you know that when you took off from dropping us off, that you were taking enemy fire?" I was like, "Nope, didn't know it, didn't see it, didn't." But they did, obviously, and so, by God's providence or luck or whatever you call it, it didn't occur. It didn't hit us. So.
You miss it?
I miss being up in the air and looking at things from a very different perspective, and that a regular person doesn't get to see. That's what I miss about it. Do I miss the paperwork and everything that goes along with it? Nah.
The origin of a lot of these stories about you and your wife meeting up, being separated in the military, how did you originally meet her?
Interestingly enough, we met in Dallas. It was kind of a strange circumstance. When at West Point, when you go on trips, and I guess I want to start with the U.S. government doesn't pay for clubs, doesn't pay for varsity sports. Oh. Those are all either endowments or donations or something like that. So I hesitate telling you guys, but I was in Glee Club.
Hey!
So all men's chorus.
All right.
My wife was in what was called mixed company. So, a men and women's chorus. Because we were in those two different clubs, we never met. But we happened to go on a spring break trip where both the clubs went. So what happens is you get sponsored by local folks, and what ends up happening is it's either a West Point club or a West Point parents club or something, and so you end up splitting up and staying in people's homes. And of course you never go alone, you go in pairs. And so the cadet I was staying with was dating the cadet she was staying with, and so we ended up on kind of blind double date sort of thing going on, and she decided, nope, not interested in me. But we got back, and
Was it your singing?
I don't think it was the singing. Just she wasn't ready for any of that, I think, was what she wasn't looking, wasn't interested. Like I said, it's time management. Hey, I don't have time for you.
Right.
And, but what ended up happening, I went over to her dorm room after the fact, and it was one of those things where, and she tells the story better than me, but she was trying to get rid of me. Okay. And so she pulls out her Bible and says, "Hey, I'm reading my Bible thinking that, okay, this is going to run this guy off pretty quickly." I was like, "Well, hey, I'm a pastor's kid, so right. What are you reading? Let's talk about it." Yeah. And then, okay, that didn't work, in her head.
Made it worse.
then it was, well, I have this paper to write. I'm in advanced political science. I've got to do it. This is our term paper. Well, hey, I'm a political science major. Can I help you?
Man.
Whatever you are, I am too.
So she would say from that point, being a political science guy and already talking about politics, she knew what she was getting into later on down the line.
So how long between her trying to deflect you to her saying, okay, I guess you win. We're going to be a couple. How long did that take?
Not very long.
Okay.
Not very long after that. So I was a junior, which is called a cow. She was a yearling, which is a sophomore.
Okay.
And I'd say we were dating pretty seriously after that.
All right.
And to the point where my spring break, my senior year, I actually, went to her dad and asked for her hand. And then we had a picnic back up at West Point, and I proposed to her. So we had a little over a year-long engagement, because you can't be married at West Point, can't have dependents.
Okay.
But it actually worked out, because she was a year behind me. So when I graduated, I went to Fort Rucker for all the flight school training, which was about a year long. And so we got married after she graduated, and then ended up at Fort Carson within a couple of months of each other. So it actually worked out very well.
Right.
A couple of things that you have dropped during this interview is that on the night that you went to your wife about maybe filing for office, that she said this is the culmination of everything you've been working for. And then just now you said political science major. So, she knew what you were working for. And what were you working for?
Oh, again, just to work in...
To be a public servant.
To be a public servant. Whatever capacity that means, I'll tell you this story. Moving back to New Bern and wanting to be involved, I got on my knees one day and I said, hey, God, I'm going to try and get involved in the Republican Party, and I'm going to say yes to everything they ask me to do. I said, so, if you don't want me to say yes, don't let them ask me. Yeah. And so, the day I showed up to the Craven County Republican Men's Club, I got asked to be the precinct chair. Yes. And then I ended up a precinct organizer. Yes. Then I got asked to be the chairman of the party. Yes. And then got asked to run for alderman. Yes. And then got asked to run for Senate. Yes. And so, is it the path I envisioned? No. But God has always said, he'll direct your path. And so the opportunities opened up, and here I am.
So you said you listened to the podcast, so
Yes.
Maybe you've thought about this, but if you had a magic wand and you could change anything in our politics, what would it be?
I've gone back and forth about how I would answer. So the magic wand question, I would at least cut our early voting in half. It is hard on the candidates, and it's like, okay, well, you signed up for this. You know what you're getting into. Okay, no sympathy there. But it's a resource thing when it gets down to the county level. And they already have a difficult time filling all of the judgeships, all of the assistant positions, and having 17 days across a 20 calendar day period for a part-time job, really. I mean, that's, I guess seasonal is a little more, and it's a very short season. You end up getting people that are retired and want to be involved, but can't work those long days.
Right.
And then now this year, I'm gonna say we expanded the number of voting sites. Craven County normally has 4. We now have 5. Lenoir County normally has 4. We have 5. Beaufort County somehow is about the same. But now you're recruiting more people in an unfunded mandate. Yeah. The county has to pick up the tab for those additional workers. Mm-hmm. And I've heard about studies, I actually want to read about them, that, when you expand early voting, the turnout really doesn't change. And I really think it's the people and myself included, you tend to procrastinate. Oh, I got time. Oh, I got time. Oh, I got time. So if you just make it a week, that's all you got.
Yeah.
And then you'll make time. Like I talked about earlier, you'll prioritize what you think's important. Then you can recruit people because it's a more defined period. You can have more quality people. You'll get a better result and have to spend less money to do it. And so to me, it's a fiscal resource, not money, and a physical resource, the amount of people. And that's just talking about what the government does. The parties have volunteers outside and observers inside. It makes it much more easier to recruit those folks because it's a lot less time. So if I had the opportunity, I'd cut it at least in half. Maybe it's just a week. It's 8 days. Because I am a fan of early voting, give everybody a chance to go out and vote, not just election day, but it's way too long here in the state of North Carolina.
I tend to agree with you. I have a friend who is a precinct judge, and she says those first 5 days of early voting is like watching paint dry.
Right.
And everyone looks to the presidential election as, big crowds. But, most of our elections are not presidential elections. There's
right.
municipal elections. There's interim elections. And
right.
She says it's very hard to recruit people. Hey, come sit in this fire station for
right.
12 hours
right.
and watch,
exactly.
one or two people come in.
For the entire day. Yeah.
And I always thought, Senator, there could be a compromise, because I certainly am sensitive to folks saying, well, we need to have as many opportunities as for folks to vote. And I agree with that. Like, okay, so truncate it as far as the days go, and then throw in some, late nights, early mornings, so those shift workers can come in and maybe you do that 1 or 2 days so they can have an easy opportunity. But definitely 2 weeks plus of you could be the only. There's more. I've had this happen. There are more workers in that fire station than there are voters.
Right.
Well, Senator Bob Brinson, we appreciate everything you're doing in North Carolina politics, your willingness to serve in the North Carolina Senate. You certainly know how to do politics better. Thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
The Do Politics Better podcast is sponsored by the North Carolina Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association. Beer and wine distributors in North Carolina are family-owned companies that directly employ more than 5,600 men and women across the state. The North Carolina Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association works with the General Assembly to develop alcohol policies that ensure fairness in a competitive marketplace and promote responsible behavior. Visit the North Carolina Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association at ncbeerwine.com for more information.
All right, Senator. Senator Brinson has been your official colleague now for 2 weeks. He took Senator Jim Perry's place. I know you still think a lot of Senator Perry, as do I. But can you tell us, have you gotten to talk to Senator Brinson, gotten to know him yet?
Senator Brinson is going to be great for Eastern North Carolina. It was fun to see him sworn in and walked in by the escort committee during our session last week. He's in New Bern. He's got a background I think is uniquely tailored to that particular district. I'm excited to see what he's going to do there. I think he's going to be great. But I've really enjoyed getting to know him so far. I think he's going to do big things within the caucus.
Talk about that seating ceremony. You on the other side of the interview, you were talking about the flag being draped over Representative Alexander's seat. We do have these traditions in the General Assembly that most of the public doesn't see, but it's a nice little ceremony we do for newly minted members.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, he was escorted in by a bipartisan group of members of the North Carolina Senate and presented in the chamber. I think he actually received his oath of office earlier back in district, or maybe during one of the skeleton sessions. But it's a good opportunity during the short session to remember some of the pomp and celebration that we had on Swearing In Day, which is not too far away now that we're recording in September.
Tweet of the week.
The Tweet of the Week is sponsored by the North Carolina Pork Council, representing hog farmers around the state working hard to do agriculture better. Today, hog farms are reducing their carbon footprint by covering lagoons, reducing emissions, and generating renewable natural gas. To learn more, visit ncpork.org. All right, this week's tweet of the week is from our very own Sky David. By the way, she's on a trip this week. It's a belated birthday trip, and she's having a good time. So again, Senator Sulry, thanks for being here and standing in for her. But it's a quote tweet, and if you want to follow Sky, you can do so at Skydiving11. She was responding to a Brian Murphy tweet on September 14th. This was during the NC State football game, and I can't even remember who NC State was playing, but this is what Brian Murphy said. NC State quarterback Grayson McCall is out for the game per ACC Network broadcast. Sky retweeted that and said, "Heard his pride is injured." Now, Senator, I know you're a lifelong Wolfpack. Oh, you're he's looking off into the distance here.
You know, Brian, isn't there a rule about awarding yourself tweet of the week? A little shameless by Sky trying to get in there while she's gone.
In fairness, I thought it was a good tweet. I mean, so, Grayson is out this Saturday.
He is. C.J. Bailey's going to have a great opportunity to start in Clemson. That's going to go one of two ways.
Yeah.
We are going to see, C.J. Bailey, have the game of his life and win in Death Valley, which would be the most NC State and Clemson thing to happen. Or, Clemson will find its stride. I hate that for Grayson. I hope he's okay.
What is the injury?
I don't think it's been announced, or I haven't seen the news yet today, but he was a heck of a player at Coastal Carolina. But he just did not look right after that hit just before half at it was Louisiana Tech game.
Okay.
And I saw some pictures of how Coach Dorn was down the sideline, trying to help Grayson along after he got hurt there. But Bailey, he looked great in the second half. He's a heck of a talent. He was a heck of a talent in high school. So I'm excited to see what he does in South Carolina this weekend. But I am, unlike I made the trip to Charlotte, I am not making the trip to Death Valley.
Okay.
I've probably done my one away game so far this season.
So you and I thought we could reconcile here.
I don't know. You said some pretty. You had some pretty strong words about NC State fans
All right,
during
so
the NCAA tournament.
In defense, here's what it was. One, I paid tuition. My son goes to NC State,
Sure.
so I feel like maybe I'm in the club, and that gives me the right to say some things, but maybe not because I didn't go to NC State.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're a lifelong Wolfpacker. Can you talk about growing up as a Wolfpack fan? Because you did pull me aside in the Senate last year, and you're like, "Hey, man, that wasn't cool." Do you know what it's like growing up as an NC State fan?
I'm a third-generation State guy. My granddad went to State back after World War II. Dad went to State. Mom and Dad went to State. Lots of aunts and uncles. I have, some of my earliest childhood memories are going to NC State football games with my granddad. I remember going to Reynolds Coliseum watching basketball games. Now that was the Les Robinson era. Those were my formative years. But I mean, it's a character building process. Not a lot of wins. Phillip Rivers in the early 2000s or Chuck Amato. That was a highlight of college football. I remember the early days of Herb Sendek and watching some incredible ACC tournament runs. There was one year when he had 5 players that played just about every minute on the way to an ACC championship game, and there's a walk-on named Luke Buffum who would come in and spell them from time to time. I can't remember who they lost to that year, but I still remember going to Greensboro Coliseum. My mom or dad would take me. They had a Bojangle stand outside the stadium. I'd get some chicken supremes and sit there as a young kid and watch basketball. It was special. It was special.
Are we back to the glory days of the Valvano years? No. But I do believe NC State, there seems to be a sense of optimism, like a shot in the arm. And maybe it's the kind of the afterglow of the run they just made in the tournament, the basketball tournament, and of course the women as well. But are we turning the tide? I say we, is it because my son went to NC State, so I'm saying we. But what do you think?
I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, State fans are, optimistic and simultaneously cynical at the same time, I think. So we're a different fan base. But we show up. Look, I mean, half of Bank of America Stadium was filled with NC State fans during the Tennessee game. And we packed out, the lower quadrant of the arena in Phoenix during the Final Four run. We show up, even when we're losing, we're going to be there. We are nothing if not loyal. We're going to back our guys every single weekend.
It's interesting you say that, because Sky is a season ticket holder this year, football, and she'll text me during the game. She's like, because, it wasn't a great start this past Saturday. Yeah. She said, my section, I'm afraid, is suicidal right now. Like, people were losing.
We're passionate as well. Sky being a season ticket holder voluntarily as an NC State fan's impressive. I was born into it. I didn't have much of a choice. Okay. Which, not complaining about it. It probably wouldn't be who I am today if not for being the character building NC State fan that I am. But yeah, I could see that. She's from Illinois, right? Illinois fan.
Yeah. She's in Illinois. Not much to cheer for in Illinois.
No, but they have a national championship in basketball. At least in my lifetime. I was born in 1987. I think prior to this year, our last basketball conference title was, I think, 1989. We have not seen an ACC football title in my lifetime. I think the last one of those was in the 1970s. I watched a lot of close calls. It's just kind of the story of being a State fan. Yeah, almost there.
For our new listeners, I don't think they understand that in Eastern North Carolina, NC State means a lot to Eastern North Carolina. When I grew up in Duplin County, the reason we rooted for NC State was because we're an agriculture county. I didn't even understand that UNC was, the school that it was. I always thought it was just NC State.
Now, you almost said flagship school there, and I'm glad you stopped yourself.
Well, I realize there are two flagships.
We have co-flagship schools. We have North Carolina State University and UNC Chapel Hill's co-flagship university. Just want to be clear on that. In NC State, we obviously have a great ag program. We have an outstanding engineering program. One of the best in the nation. We've made some really, really great investments in that over the past decade and a half or so. And I think that the state is ready and willing to do so, especially as we grow. We're looking at a STEM-based workforce. NC State is primed to capitalize on its reputation as a growth, and there's no reason that the next Georgia Tech or Purdue, one of the top preeminent state-funded engineering schools, can't be in Raleigh. I think that's in line with a lot of, philosophically what we want to do as a General Assembly and making those investments. And I hope to continue to be a part of doing that at NC State.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, my son is getting a top-notch education at NC State. He's a senior this year. He's a chemistry major. Blows me away. Sure. The resources that NC State has. And then, he is, I believe, ready for the workforce, too. He told me, we were thinking, do you want to go to grad school? And he's like, I think I'd like to just see what the job market's like. And I have no doubt, no worries whatsoever that NC State is preparing him. In fact, he said they send him like job announcements.
Oh, they do. That's what NC State is good at doing. They're good at training, North Carolina's workforce. I tell this, it gets under some people's skin, but I truly believe that NC State is the most important university in the state of North Carolina because of the breadth of its educational opportunities, its mission to go out into all 100 counties and serve, and just its presence in so many different parts of North Carolina, be it in our schools, in our businesses, in our government. It is really, really doing the mission of the people of the state of North Carolina.
Okay, well, let's close it out by talking about football. Give me a prediction. I know you laid out the two scenarios. You want to give me a score?
All right, so it wasn't so long ago that I watched us lose in Death Valley on a last-second field goal. So I'm going to predict that NC State is tied with 2 minutes left to go, 24-24 in Death Valley in the fourth quarter. C.J. Bailey hits Noah Rogers on a fade down the right-hand side, and we go in and kick a last-second field goal to win the game 27-24.
I love it. Let's see if that holds tight. And for listeners out there, we hope you enjoy a good weekend of college football, some pro football as well. We hope it's dry for you and we get some good fall weather. Senator Benton Solry, we appreciate you being on the podcast.
It's great to be here, Brian. I appreciate you having me on.
And for all the listeners out there, remember to do politics better.